Motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Stewart, are you going to present this motion from the Board of Education for a needs-based public school capital fund grant? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be glad to, Chairman. And let me just again echo everyone's comments. We welcome you to the board, and we look forward to working with you to make Harnett County the great place it is.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is bring before you the Harnett County Schools request to apply for a needs-based public school capital fund grant. We've discussed this several times with the Board of Education, also with you at a work session, and Dr. Fleming did propose this. So I just want to go back over the parameters of the grant just for your information. It must be a Tier 1 or Tier 2 county, in which Harnett is a Tier 2 county. The grant cannot exceed $10 million for a Tier 2 county. The cost of the proposed Northwest Harnett Elementary School was $38.1 million, and in order to apply for the grant, they did increase and change some things on the application, and so it puts it closer to a $41 million school, but they did say that they are looking at ways to cut that back to stick to the original budget. So if you do include that, the increase in the cost of the school, the net up from the grant would only be $7 million, and we have formulated how much we've been collecting in lottery revenue over the last 5 years, and it would be $7.2 million for the next 5 years. So lottery funds have increased year over year, and we could make up the difference if you so choose, and if they are awarded the grant, we could supplement and use other funds to make this difference up. So it's really up to you to decide. Their board did vote to proceed with the grant application. So that's all we have at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Do I hear a motion to approve this request?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the request on the Board of Education's for the public school capital fund grant.
Thank you, Commissioner Nickel. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Weatherspoon. Any discussion?
Now, this is, just so there's a clear understanding, this allows the school board to apply for the grant. It doesn't obligate the school board to accept the grant. Is that correct?
That is the way I understand it. I believe Dr. Fleming shared at the work session that they would not accept the grant if it was less than the maximum $10 million. I do believe that should we approve this and they request the grant and be awarded the grant, that they would talk with us further before they accepted the grant. So that is my understanding at this point. We've talked, as Ms. Stewart said, we've talked about this with the prior board a couple of times. At one time, when it was thought that the revenues from the lottery that would be forfeited was a little bit less than $7 million, but then I think the county estimated it would be like $7.2 million. So as I look at it, it almost seems like it's pay me now or pay me later, bird in the hand, worth two in the bush. There's been some speculation that lottery proceeds might increase. At the same token, we know what shape our state budget is in now, state finances are in now with regard to the consequences of COVID. So who's to say that it will increase or even stay the same? So I think that's the question that we have before us this morning. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye. Mr. Nickel?
Aye.
Matthews, aye.
Johnson, no.
Weatherspoon, yes.
Ms. McCoy?
No.
The motion carries 3-2. Next, we have a request to consider the acceptance of a BJA grant, fiscal year 2020 Adult Drug Court and Veterans Treatment Court discretionary grant. Mr. Haney, are you going to share that with us? Thank you.
Yes, sir. First, I would like to say congratulations to our newly elected commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Harnett County District 11A Veterans Treatment Court is asking the board to accept a $500,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance on their behalf. Included in your agenda packet are the grant award packet, the project abstract that was submitted by the Veterans Treatment Court, and the budget narrative submitted by the Veterans Treatment Court. Per the project abstract, this grant would be used to assist veterans in high-poverty counties in eastern North Carolina with rehabilitation for substance abuse issues. If accepted, the grant would provide $500,000 over 3 years from October 1st of this year through September 30th of 2023. Based on the budget narrative submitted by the Veterans Treatment Court, it would include $255,000 or $85,000 a year for 3 positions. 2 of them would be new positions, a regional coordinator covered at 100% and a case manager covered at 50%, along with funding at 50% for a legal assistant, which is an existing position currently housed in the DA's office. It is currently unfilled. It would also include $54,000 for fringe benefits for those employees, just under $56,000 for travel, $3,750 for equipment, $7,437 for supplies, $14,400 in consultant fees for initial clinical assessments for those veterans, $82,442 for contracts to conduct field contact for veterans in high poverty areas and to monitor veterans in high risk of continued substance abuse, $4,500 for conference registration fees, and $22,000 for Corisoft airphones to allow veterans to communicate and remain accountable. The grant would also require serving 120 veterans over the lifetime of the grant. A few additional items to bring to your attention, just so you are aware, Veterans Treatment Court is not a legal entity and therefore cannot accept this grant on its own. That's why it's coming before you. By accepting this grant, the county is responsible for that. If accepted, this grant would expand Veterans Treatment Court. Just for some history for our citizens and for you as the board, the court originally operated with 1 paid employee, had a limited budget, and most of its support was volunteer. In 2016, the court's scope was expanded thanks to a pair of federal grants from SAMHSA and BJA, which is the current grant that you're considering, that provided just under $1.4 million over the course of 3 years. And they went from 1 employee to 6, 3 full-time, 3 part-time, and it also became a regional court serving veterans from a 60-mile radius. Those 2 grants ran out in 2019. The current picture, Veterans Court is currently operating on a 3-year BJA grant that runs out in September of 2022 and provides approximately $150,000 a year, and can only be spent on the items that are included in that budget narrative, which you, similar to the current grant you're considering. The county budgeted just under $50,000 in the current fiscal year, which will run out at the end of this month. Sandhill Center, our local LME, has provided $158,000 for the current fiscal year, and this can only be used for treatment and is intended to be a one-time allocation. There are currently several funding gaps in the current BJA grant and other funding sources which will not be filled by this grant if approved. So with that, I'm available for any questions you may have.
Do you have a figure of how much the funding gaps would be?
We do not have a figure at this time. We would need to work with the Veterans Treatment Court Program Coordinator to identify that. There are some leftover, a small amount, I think it's around $27,000 in leftover funding from year 1 of the current BJA grant that could be rolled over if approved by BJA, and I believe that approval has been given as of this morning.
Well, I have a question. What does the new grant mean for current operations?
The new grant is primarily expansion, but for current operations, it would include, as I mentioned, that legal assistant position at 50%, which I believe the other 50% is covered by the current BJA grant. It would also include that $10,000 for monitoring veterans at high risk of continued substance abuse, and then also that Corisoft airphones that allow veterans to communicate at $22,000. Those are the items, to my understanding, that are explicitly current services provided by the Veterans Court. Everything else, to my knowledge, would be an expansion.
Also, how does the county support veterans operations so far?
The county has been a partner with Veterans Treatment Court over the years, obviously through the acceptance of these grants. And administration, we have a grant administrator in the finance office that works very closely with the Veterans Treatment Court. The court also coordinates through our Veteran Services Department as a liaison. Our Veteran Services Director, Eric Truesdale, is actually a member of that, the board of the Veterans Treatment Court. And then the county has, as I mentioned, provided $50,000 in this fiscal year for the court, and provided, I think, about $50,000 last year as well.
Do they provide us with detailed expenditures, the money that we give them?
Yes, that runs through our finance office and our grants administrator, so she is the main point of contact in understanding the budget, and she has all that information correct.
Thank you.
How many other counties do we serve? Does the Veterans Court serve?
I'm not aware of how many other counties at this time. I know that a large portion do come from Harnett and Lee counties, the 11A district. However, the radius of service is a 60-mile radius, but my understanding is that the Veterans Court will serve any veteran from any county so long as they are able to provide their own transportation to services. I know during COVID that has changed. I know they're doing a lot more remotely.
Brian, do you happen to know what the success rate is?
My
Graduating
understanding is that it is a 95 to 96% success rate. Only about 5% or so of veterans that go through the program get in trouble again.
Very good.
Is Lee County contributing any to the administration? like
Lee
we are?
County contributed last year when the previous two grants that I mentioned expired at in October of 2019. We had approached Lee County on behalf of Veterans Treatment Court to ask for support, seeing as I think approximately 30% of veterans at the time were coming from Lee County, and they did provide us with $85,000 for the past fiscal year, of which at the end of that time we only used about $46,000 of that funding, and the rest was sent back to Lee County at their request. But there's been no additional funding from Lee County.
Do you know if this is something that, since if I heard it correctly, we're talking about the majority of services to veterans in Harnett and Lee County, is this something they're prepared to continue to help with funding gaps as they arise as we continue on with this program?
The understanding that we had previously in talking to the Lee County manager was that this was a one-time allocation last fiscal year. We have not approached them to discuss a possible change in that, so I couldn't speak to that at this point.
Thank you.
Do you know how many veterans are employed in the treatment court now?
I do not.
And if we approve this grant, they get 2 more positions?
This would add 2 additional positions to their current 6, correct? And those positions would be necessary to fulfill the scope of this grant.
And so the purpose of the grant then would be to be able to serve more veterans.
Serve more veterans in low-income counties across the eastern North Carolina is what the narrative says. There is a requirement, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, that the court would have to bring in 120 veterans into the program over the course of that 3 years, so roughly 40 new veterans a year that meet those qualifications. And that's typical. The current BJA grant also requires bringing in, I think it's somewhere around 35 veterans per year. And that figure, my understanding is, would count towards the 40. So it wouldn't be, an additional 75. It would be 40 total.
If they get the grant, what is the county's responsibility?
The county's responsibility at this point would be administration of the grant. Certainly, as with all grants, it's a 3-year grant. So if it were to expire at the end of the 3-year period, there may be a request for the county to assume responsibility for those positions in the absence of other outside funding. I can't speak to that at this time, though.
Thank you.
So is the purpose then that this grant would help start, I guess, this additional service with the expectation at the end of that 3 years, where would that funding come from then to support this?
Typically with these types of grants, and that's why we've talked about the previous grants that the court operated under, those federal grants are really designed to get a program up and running and then for it to become sustainable beyond that. Typically, and that's why there have been some applications that have not been approved, primarily because when you receive new grants, this grant being an example, they want you to provide some expanded service. Therefore, future grants, I would be hesitant to say you would get a future grant at the end of this from BJA to continue this program specifically without some kind of additional programming. That said, certainly there are other opportunities for grant funding as we've pursued for the court for the last several years that potentially could take that on. Otherwise, it would be up to the county or to the board to decide what you want to do at that point.
So the funding for what we currently have then is either supported through new grants or partners or the county?
Correct.
Okay. And so I'm assuming this expansion grant would fall in the same window, that we would have to expand efforts for grants or community partners in order to keep that program going after the 3 years.
Correct. And at this point, the community partners that have provided funding, be it Lee County, be it Sand Hill Center, have expressed their intent that these are one-time allocations, so we would have to obviously expand our net and find new partners.
So am I hearing then that this may become more and more difficult as we go along? If these partners that have been helping us have been saying this is a one-time thing?
I would say at this point, yes, that is my understanding. I think that, we've tried hard to lobby on behalf of the court so that the county's expense in Veterans Court was as small as it could be, and that's why we've sought out additional partners along with Veterans Treatment Court. But again, in the absence of some of those partners deciding to rethink that one-time funding allocation, yes, it has become more difficult to solicit funding.
Well, I will say one more thing. It's obvious to me that this county and the commissioners have been very supportive of the treatment court. I cannot speak for my fellow commissioners, but I think the feeling is mutual among those that are seated today. However, I will say I do have a little bit of reservation about expansion when we are it doesn't appear to me to be on sound footing financially to be able to fund what we already have in place. But I could be wrong. It's just as it seems from what I've heard. Anybody else have any other questions or comments?
I think you've covered it.
Do I hear a motion to accept this BGA grant for the Veterans Treatment Court? Hearing none, the request is denied, and we will move on to County Manager's report. Ms. Paula Stewart. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, all I have is what's in the packet, but I did want to tell you we had a successful Employee Appreciation Week last week, and we ended it on Friday with our annual awards luncheon, which was all drive-through. And if you were in these two buildings, you came in this room to pick it up. So it was we did the COVID guidelines for that as well. And we did an online thank you to our employees. So just so you know, that went very well, and I think our employees were very excited. The board granted employees 24 hours of extra leave this year because of all they've had to sacrifice, and a lot of them had to come to work and be faced with the possibility of getting COVID. So I wanted to thank the board officially for that, and I thank all the employees. I've gotten nothing but very positive feedback on the way they do feel appreciated, and during this time it's been hard on our staff. So I just wanted to say that publicly, so thank you. And that's all I have.
On behalf of the board, I would like to thank you and our staff and our employees as well. Working in the public sector, I can relate to how challenging these last few months have been. The uncertainty, the fear, if you will, of catching a virus, something unseen that we really don't know. So I do know it does create a stress for those who have to and need to work with the public, and please convey our thanks to our folks who have done what they needed to do to provide the service for our citizens and our community. Thank you. Any new business to come before the board. Hearing none, I think we have a need to go into closed session. Mr. Nichol, if you'll read that for us.
I move that the board go into closed session for the following purposes: to discuss certain personal matters and to instruct the county staff concerning the position to be taken by the county in negotiating a contract for the acquisition of real property, and to discuss the matters related to economic development in Harnett County.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Nichol. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson, for the second. Commissioner Nichol, how do you vote?
Aye.
Aye. Matthews?
Yes.
Aye.
Ms. McCoy?
Aye.
And the motion carries. We will now go into closed session.